You're prepared for today.
Version of what we knew best as the Harrier. Sadly missing from our skies for just over the last decade, but slightly different in terms of the nose cone in this aircraft, with it having been redesigned to take one of the American APG 60 series of radars to give the aircraft a true air-to-air capability. Very similar in some ways to what we did to the Sea Harrier in its latter years. And very nice of the Spanish Navy unit to apply special tail markings to the aircraft, especially for this show. So the aircraft then coming in for its first fast fly past, around 450 knots the speed here. And performing a teardrop to come back round with a derry roll at the apex for a fly past incorporating an aileron roll. After the United States Marine Corps, Spain was the first export customer for the Harrier. They bought the AV-8A model, calling it the AV-8S Matador. They were delivered from 1976, built out a couple of two-seaters, and they flew from the two Spanish Navy carriers, the Dedalo and the Príncipe de Asturias. Double aileron roll there, 350 knots, accelerating now. These Harrier 2 versions, the AV-8B, began arriving around 1987-88 and the B Plus from 1996, and it's one of those with a night and all-weather attack capability that we see here. The Spanish Navy doesn't have any true aircraft carriers any longer, so since 2013 they've been flying the Harriers from the landing helicopter dock ship Juan Carlos I, but it still affords them a very potent expeditionary capability. Now in for a maximum performance turn. Maintaining 350 knots, which is the best turn speed for the Harrier. You'll see that on the apex of that turn, the aircraft reaches about 1,000 feet, which gives a good visual impression of a relatively level turn. If the aircraft stays at 300 feet, then it looks like the aircraft has descended. This from the single Rolls-Royce Pegasus F402 vector thrust turbofan engine. This very close coupled four-poster layout of rotating nozzles was, of course, British invention. It was a French engineer, in fact, by the name of Michel Vibo, who developed various concepts for high-performance vertical takeoff and landing aircraft with a Bristol engine and vector thrust from blowers. The potential was seen, the details were passed on to Dr. Stanley Hooker, the Bristol Aero Engine's technical director, and from there the power plant concept was further developed and patented by Bristol in 1957 with rotating nozzles. And all of this was brought to bear in the first Hawker P1127 prototype, which made its first tethered flight at Dunsfold in October 1960. That then led on through the pre-production Kestrel series on to Harrier, which was first delivered to No. 1 Squadron, RAF, in April 1969. The 4 thrust vectoring nozzles on the Harrier can be orientated between 0 and 98 degrees. They're controlled manually by the pilot using a separate lever next to the throttle. And it's also got hot air-driven controls on the nose, the tail and the wingtips for better control at low air speeds, just like we see here. As used by the RAF and Royal Navy, on which the process has been considerably automated and the risk reduced by a significant degree.
So I was an air cadet in 1980 and our summer camp was at RAF Wittering. And I was lucky enough to sit in the cockpit of one of the original Harriers, but I was shocked to see that the interlink between the manual control in the cockpit and the nozzles was via a very beefed up bicycle chain.
I should think it's rather different on this Harrier 2 model we see here, let alone the
I would hope so.
But now the aircraft being brought in from the north, decelerating to the hover, and this is where you really get to see the Harrier come into its own, standing on those pillars of thrust from the Pegasus engine. It's about to get noisy. reality, they've not long got back, this unit, from a 6-month bolt-ops cruise on the Juan Carlos I, the ship they deploy on nowadays, during which they sailed from Istanbul to Helsinki. And this is with a relatively small fleet of these aircraft, around a dozen, including the 2-seater, on the strength of Escuadrilla 009. So, for them to be able to then generate 2 aircraft to bring to RIAT, they don't do many displays with these aeroplanes either, is outstanding. And we're going to see a rolling vertical landing, an RVL, to finish the display.
Yeah, using just a very slight mix of jet-borne and wind-borne lift to control the aircraft.
In this display season. This is a one-off fly past for today's display, all supporting the attendance of so many Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft, past and present, that are in the static display at the eastern end